No air conditioning. No brakes. Hell then. Hell has no cruise control.
Written and directed by Jorge Delarosa, we are talking Hell Van. Now, I always sent this as a screener, and I have to be honest, I was a little apprehensive because I thought, it's going to be some trashy B-movie, silly schlock nonsense, and I see enough of them. But this wasn't actually what I was expecting. It's actually taken relatively serious, despite this silly name, the awful posters, and the very lack of any information about this movie online. And it's actually quite a nihilistic kind of horror movie. It still has an element of schlock in it, but it was taken more seriously and far more graphic than I was expecting. So what's the story? So it focuses on a van, essentially, where we have this guy who is a kind of firefighter, but he seems to crack for whatever reason and ends up burning a church full of children, and then is pursued by the police and commits suicide by shooting himself in this particular kind of van. The van is then impounded by the police, and it seems to mysteriously be going around the kind of the neighbourhood. Police try to approach it, but every time that they do, either this evil force emanating from the van seems to either directly kill anyone who approaches it, or causes them to either kill themselves or do harm to themselves or other people. And it's effectively the attempts mainly by the police, but a couple of other people as well, to ultimately find out what's going on with this kind of particular van. Now, I will point out, this movie isn't like a killer car movie in the vein of like Christine. It's not like we have this vehicle mowing people down or anything like that. It's kind of has more of it's just the kind of the conduit for this kind of evil force which affects people, and they even say it in this movie like a kind of a virus or some type of parasite. And then we get much more kind of like grand end of the world kind of vibes towards the end of the movie. So let's talk about what I think works in this film. So, like I've said, I think this movie sounds like it's going to be a silly kind of schlocky movie along the lines of Party Bus from Hell. But it's actually, as I say, more of a straight horror, to be honest. But it does have a tinge of kind of schlock. There are some kind of like quite graphic sort of gore sequences. Everything is done on a practical basis for the most part. And it's a very low budget movie, but I have to say, I think this movie is quite inventive in many ways. Even from the opening credits, I have to say I was quite, the opening credits are like better than I was kind of expecting from this movie. And then we have a variety, as I say, of different kind of like horror afflictions, so to speak, that is put upon various kind of people who attempt to come close to this kind of van. Everything from gouging their own eyes out to getting them kind of like mind controlled to kind of shoot people, to seemingly kind of like have a kind of layer of crust that kind of goes all over them and things like this. So all sorts of different kind of like VFX, practical kind of VFX, some of which are quite gory. The movie's also intercut with kind of little shortcuts of weird, bizarre kind of like occult imagery through the film, which kind of gives it that kind of, like I say, quite a dark tone to it, and quite a kind of serious kind of like occult tone to it. And we also have cuts with this kind of radio DJ who seems to be like permanently online, despite this movie being taken place over a few days. She's constantly in the radio booth. So it's kind of like it's quite inventive. It's quite sort of like visually speaking. There's a reasonable amount going on here, and far more I think than you may think. For a clearly low-budget movie, I have to say I was still quite impressed with the scale of this movie. It appears we have, cars, going off cliffs with things like that. We have a couple of like kind of set pieces where there's kind of like vehicles involved. There's quite a large cast in regards to kind of various kind of different police officers and things like that. So the movie actually has more. I mean, it's not like World War or anything like that, but it has a larger scale, and a bit more of a production value than I was kind of initially anticipating with this movie. We have quite a lot of kind of wide shots. There's quite a lot of vehicle chases. There's quite a lot of kind of like different characters with all of them have got police, cars or outfits and things. So yeah, I have to say, I think the movie's kind of like production, although it's clearly very, very low budget, it's still very kind of impressive. So it's probably like a movie, I would say, for indie horror fans. Like if you like your low budget kind of productions, you don't mind a bit of sort of gonzo horror, a bit of grindhouse horror. I mean, grindhouse I think is probably the best way to kind of talk about this movie, because it really does feel like a gritty, grimy, quite kind of like say nihilistic kind of viewpoint. Then I think you might enjoy it. What does it lack? Well, I mean, it lacks really much in the way of story, if I'm being completely honest. I feel the movie doesn't really have a main protagonist. It generally has. I mean, there is one guy who I suppose is the main protagonist, but we say so little of him. He barely registers. But there's not in much of a through line. It's just various attempts by different people to try and find out. Well, basically a kind of either attack or arrest or pursue this kind of hell van. I mean, it's kind of that over and over, and how this kind of hell van then affects the people around it. But that's kind of it. There's not much kind of story outside of that. The movie has a reasonable kind of setup, but once the hell van is kind of activated, so to speak, it doesn't really have much in the way of story. The acting, I'm personally willing to give this a pass, because it's clearly, as I say, a very low budget production. But the acting's a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, that's when you do see the kind of some of the more schlocky kind of the B-movie-esque kind of style kind of acting and things like that. But I think it's okay. But it's not going to be for anyone who wants kind of like trained actors on screen or anything like that. Yeah, so the acting's a little hokey, but I personally think it was fine for the kind of the budget of this movie that it is. Some stuff seems superfluous to me. That the whole point of this having this kind of radio DJ, and we keep kind of cutting back to her, and she's playing sort of heavy metal and talking about like horror host kind of stuff. And it didn't really amount to much, I didn't think. And I was like, why have we spent so much time cutting back to this DJ all the time? Like who seems to never be off the air, despite this movie becoming over the course of a few days. And the same can be said about these kind of like little sequences where we have this weird like satanic imagery, and that I kind of get to a point, because it's kind of obviously showing us that there's what's going on in people's minds or something like that, and it's just a little bizarre and kind of off kilter. So that I kind of understood, but the DJ stuff, I don't know, to me didn't really have any purpose, and I just felt was a little bit like, is this going somewhere? And it didn't. And like I said, I think the main issue though that is for this movie is it's just very kind of visually interesting, but ultimately narratively it's somewhat kind of directionless, and it's more of just an experience than kind of like a story, so to speak. But it's better than I was expecting, I would say that. I mean, what you do have as little vignettes, little kind of sequences, I think is quite effective if you don't mind a low budget movie, and it's better than I feel the movie you think it's going to be to a degree. I mean, like I said, it's still a low budget movie. It still is kind of like very kind of grindhouse, but it's taken sort of more seriously than I was expecting. And I didn't mind it. I quite enjoyed it, although it has flaws. And like I say, narratively, it's by far and away the weakest issue here. They should have had a bit more of a stronger maybe story involved, maybe less side characters, and concentrated on maybe one or two kind of protagonists. But it was better than I was expecting. But it's not a great film by any stretch. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.